introduce a friend, a former colleague in the Northern Virginia area, Betsy France, who is the president and CEO of True North. She is known for her acumen in strategic planning, facilitation, fundraising, governance, and organizational management. Her executive leadership spans over 30 years. She is a very well sought after speaker and consultant for expertise in maximizing team and personal capacity, strategic systems building, and leadership development. Her trainings extend to management of nonprofits as well as private and government organizations. Under Betsy's leadership, she's had clients like Boeing, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Newman University, Silver Lake College, Arlington Sheriff's Office, and the American Heart Association. Personally, Betsy did a speech many, many years ago to my village, and it just resonated. And still to this day, I bow to her. She's awesome. So there you go, Betsy, take it on.
All right, let's see what you guys can see. Can you see it now?
Yep.
All right, great. Thank you, Barbara, for that really, really nice introduction. I am so excited to be here today. And I'm going to say first and foremost that I'm a huge Barbara fan. We have met many years ago, and anytime Barbara asks me to do anything, I am all there for you. Similarly, just to sort of give you a little bit of background on who I am.
Betsy, Betsy, it's Wendy. I'm interrupting just for a second.
Yeah.
Can you look at how your slide presentation is coming up on the screen and maybe make it full size?
Yeah, I think, see at the top where it says display settings, I think if you click on that drop-down menu.
Well, unfortunately, the way it is showing on mine looks different on yours. It's huge on mine, but let's see if I can make it work, or I can always flip and let you guys run it. And if that's easier, I'm happy to do that. Do you want to do that?
Well, let's see if you can.
Yeah, hold on. Let me stop sharing for a second.
Oh.
And it ought to be able to, I'm going to try it a different way.
Yeah, because in the green room, it seemed to work pretty well.
Yeah, it worked great there. Isn't that always the way life is? It's
Yeah,
just fabulous until you really want it to do otherwise. So let me try it a different way. Yeah, the challenge that I have is that the minute I take it away, I can't see you guys. So give me 1 second. I'm just going to try it a different way.
All right. And all right. I've got it loaded up on my screen just in case it doesn't work.
All right, so let me try one thing. How about now?
There. That's right. That's
all
working.
Right, great. Okay, I think we're in good
Perfect.
shape.
Yep.
Thanks, Wendy. And speaking of Wendy, Wendy is exactly who I wanted to talk about. So Wendy, thank you for that little entree. A little bit more about, Barbara shared how I knew her. I'm in Arlington, Virginia, but also Wendy is in my sphere. And I remember so very well when the Arlington neighborhood village started. And I had just incredible people come to visit me and talk to me about starting a nonprofit. At that point, I was leading our local leadership program, and thrilled to think of the breadth and depth in our community that this organization represents to us. I sat with those founders, and I remember so clearly, here are a group of incredible people who have a phenomenal idea, and they wanted to hear more about governance and fundraising and the components that we all know make a really strong organization. So that was back in, I guess, 2014. Wendy, does that sound right? About 2014 when you all started?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and I feel like I've been on the journey with you ever since. So when Barbara reached out and said, can you talk about fundraising? I thought, oh my gosh, my favorite topic. I would love to talk about fundraising. So why, some of you are probably thinking, she's crazy. She loves fundraising. How can that be? Well, I'll tell you, I think of fundraising as connecting people with means, with things they care about. It's really philanthropy. And fundraising can be a lot of fun if you're comfortable with it and if you understand it. It is purely relationship based. And the relationship is not just with the individual. I hear people say that a lot, but it's also what kind of relationship should someone have with the organization? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to discover how each one of you who's on this call, and by the way, those that aren't, can be a fundraiser. Let me quickly give you an overview of what I'm going to share with you today. And in all honesty, I'm going to share a few slides that are in reference. Mostly, we're going to have you all participate. And then finally, I really look forward to the Q&A because that's going to be what you all want to know. And I always say that the knowledge is in the room. So I hope it's an open conversation with anybody that wants to participate. And Wendy, I'm grateful to you for monitoring the Q&A today so that I can answer questions as you see fit. And please don't hesitate to interrupt me. So why does it matter? We're going to talk a little bit about why it matters. I think most of you know, but it's worth talking about. This phrase, I hate asking for money. I have heard it for the 30 years I've been in fundraising. So my goal today and my hope and wish for you all is that you don't say, I hate asking for money, but rather that you know your spot in asking for money. So that role, that spot, identifying it isn't always going to be the person who does the ask because it's so much more complex than just asking someone for money. What will you walk away with today? I'm hopeful that Steve, in the background, that you have my handout and that later on you can hand this out and people can download it right from the chat or Q&A, wherever you wish to post it. But I did hear Barbara say that all handouts will be available at the end of, I guess, October, and you all can grab it from there. And the reason that's important is because today you're the trainer. So this is a train the trainer. Every single person on this call will be able to walk away with the ability to go back to your boards and help them understand what their role is. And if you have a couple of you on the call from the same village, that's even better. You can both be listening, but I encourage you to grab a piece of paper and a pen, take notes, do whatever you want to do to trigger your own brain as to how the information that we're going to talk about today, excuse me, can be applied to your individual village. So before we do that, though, I'd like to get a little bit of an idea as to where everybody stands on the thought about asking for money. So Steve, may I ask you to launch the poll, please? And here are your choices. You just love asking for money. You're like in my camp already. You're willing to do this asking part if someone will show you how. You're thinking, oh God, I'll do it if I have to. Please ask someone else. Or no matter what, I'm out.
Okay, keep that up there. I really apologize. Something happened with our polling thing. So just keep on talking and I will get that poll up there. Okay.
That's fine. I'm happy to go to the next slide. And Steve, why don't you just let me know when you're ready? You really made me feel so good because I was the one at the beginning that was struggling. So thanks so much. I'll carry on. We talked about why is it important, and I want to give you all a landscape, the fundraising landscape. So you know you're a 501c3, and so that gives you the ability to raise funds from the public. There is a charity benefit to those giving the funds. That charity benefit seems to be always a moving target, but there is still some benefit to someone giving dollars to you. The other thing that I love about being a 501c3 is that you are in public trust. That's what a C3 means. It means that you are an open book. You're there to serve your community in whatever category your C3 is. And I don't know which one you all are. Barbara can certainly share that with anybody that wants to know, but it does allow you to reach out and ask in a different way. And think of it this way, as you're talking to someone about the village, you're asking for others. You're not asking necessarily for you personally. It's such a different thing than asking someone to give you money. You're asking them to give your village money. And then articulating the value the village brings to your community.
Okay, here we go. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So everybody should be able to see that on the screen. And I'll wait till it gets close to like 50% and then I'll share the results. This is always really amazing that we can do stuff like this. Okay, looks like we are at 50. So I'm going to end polling and share the results.
Okay, so this is so exciting to me because trying to see around everything. I'm so glad. Okay, everybody in the session is here for the right reason. So we're going to train you today to do it, as the results show that many of you are willing to ask if you understand how. Those of you that would rather do anything but ask, what I'm going to really challenge you with right now is thinking about what you might see in the next few minutes that might change your mind. It might change your mind. So Steve, I might ask you if it's possible to go ahead and close the poll, but be prepared. We might put it up again at the end and see if anybody has changed their mind. So going back to this landscape I was referring to, Giving USA, which publishes a lot of great information on how people give and why people give, in 2018 said that nonprofits raised almost $300 billion. That's 300 with a B, billion dollars. That is an enormous amount of money, enormous amount of money. So who's giving and what are they giving to? Well, people will give, and what's really important for you all as a village to understand is where you fall in this landscape. People will give first and foremost, the data suggests, to their churches and to their schools. So everyone's nonprofit that doesn't fall into those categories says, how can I be the number 3? So understanding your impact, understanding what you do is really important to be able to articulate that. So part of the 300 with a B billion dollars comes your way. Now we've all had to pivot, the overused word pivot, due to COVID. The nice thing about what I'm going to talk about today is the majority of this can still be used, doesn't make a difference if there's COVID or not. Because what we're seeing today is that people are still giving. It's wonderful. They are still giving. And corporations have shifted to be able to talk about philanthropic means of special COVID grants. So I don't know if you have someone in your membership or on staff that writes grants, but there's a lot of money out there that can help with COVID. So this is what we're going to spend our time doing today. This is going to be the participatory part. We're going to talk about this cycle. And you can see that there's only one block that says solicitation. So all you pollers that were in number 4, I don't want to ask for, no matter what, I'm going to ask you and challenge you to find yourself in one of the other areas that we have. Here's what I thought we might do. I thought we would go literally block by block and have you understand the fundraising cycle. And please, as we go through, I'm going to let you all share with the entire group through the Q&A. I think, Steve, that's where you want things in Q&A. What it might mean to you through identification, research, etc. So let's just start with the first one. And I'm going to give an example and then we'll see what you all say and I'll backfill in.
And actually, on this, let's use chat because we're going to get lots of feedback. So, so put your responses in chat, not Q&A.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, so the first one I want to talk about is identification. Now, before anybody starts firing up the chat, I want to make sure you are looking into the fact that the next block is research. So this is not research. This is purely identifying. How would you all suggest that you identify potential means of funding? Now, I can't see the chat.
I'll read some of the ones that come through. Let's see. Brainstorm, local foundations, foundations, ask members for resources, the public, solicit them all, networks, those who've given and funded in the past, county levy funding, grants handbooks, government, a platform like Spin, that's a networking group, local groups, directory of foundation, your mailing list, community foundation, volunteer base, member families, faith-based, United Way, city, identify businesses and orgs in the community, potential government sources, local businesses, elected officials,
These
friends.
are great. I'm going to let you all continue to post them.
Yeah, just keep that going, guys. And this is a great
Keep
source of
going. I'll share a few,
ideas and
share a
information.
few more. And Steve, I'll let you notice where you left off and we'll share them in. So I love that someone said community foundations. Absolutely. So I'm going to give you a few other examples of people that I put into the same bucket as the community foundations, because they're there to really serve the community, but they don't give direct service. So it's easy to get a meeting with them. They're open, they're willing to share. So in addition to your community foundation, I would also encourage you to connect with your local chamber of commerce. Chambers are there to support businesses, and businesses want to be philanthropic. Some of you may not believe that, but I can promise you it is true. They really just don't know how. I loved hearing in the last session that you all are focusing on partnerships. Ask those chambers who you might partner with. Is there a business that's in the same kind of space that you all are that you would be a natural fit with? Partnerships are beautiful and a great way to raise dollars. Your economic development. So some of you have a separate economic development department. It's its own, separate from the government. In Arlington, it is part of our government, but they are a beautiful backdrop to who's coming in, who wants to be connected, and they have the demographics of the companies that are there. So potential members for you too. And by the way, as I'm talking about this, there's not one thing I'm going to suggest to you that wouldn't transfer over to new members. Those are so closely correlated. Local leadership programs. That's how I got connected. At the time, it was called Leadership Arlington. Leadership Arlington connects with all kinds of folks. We partner with people, and there are 2,500 leadership programs across this nation. I can assure you that somewhere in an area near you, there's a local leadership program that you can connect with. Steve, do you want to read a few more?
Let's see. People with money, family trust, community-based fundraising campaigns.
So let me
We are
can I pause you right there? I
Sure.
heard people with money. So in this case, yes, but how would you identify those people with money? I mean, that's really the question. Yes, we all know who we want in our world, but how would you identify? Let me give some suggestions around that one in particular. Everyone has access to the Foundation Center, and they have a way you can go in, and some of it is free, some of it is a paid service, but you can designate your area, and it will come up with family foundations. It will come up with those that have been philanthropic in an area that you designate. So you've got to first identify the folks. The other way that has been very successful, and I will say this is a non-COVID way to raise money. Remember the days when we used to go places? Remember that? Seems like a land far, far away. But I do believe in my heart that we will go back to going to events and going to things. They may look different, but they'll be out there. So when you attend anything like that, there's usually a program, and on the back of the program, it'll list the sponsors. And you can ask yourself, who might we identify in this list that may also give to us? So take that program and take it back to whether it's your executive director or if you have a development committee, whomever is the one responsible for doing this. Steve, do you want to throw out a few more, and then we'll go to the next one?
Well, you might want to address this one. It says we are a community that is not a 501c3 because of how community is set up and not allowed to be a nonprofit. So Feel Lost as partnerships usually want to be with nonprofits.
Mhm. So I would say that what I've noticed is that many corporations have now started their own foundations for a variety of reasons, but they may not. I'll give you an example. Dominion in our area has its own foundation. So they aren't necessarily looking for the 501c3 connection because they have that. They're looking for a partnership of someone that connects them to what their purpose and their values are. The best way to find out is to go on websites and read about companies, all these companies. They usually put their philanthropic giving on their website or their core values and see where you might be aligned.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'd say let's move to the next circle.
All right, sounds good. So the next circle is about research. So you've now identified this group of folks, whether you've used technology or you've used personal relationships. What do you do? How do you want to research that? What are some examples of how you might research?
All right, I will, if folks want to share ideas on researching that you've got or things that you've done, I will do a little speed reading here. Universities seeking to engage, websites, annual reports, state library grant site, look them up online, see what their mission is and what they've supported in the past. Librarians help. Discover who funds partner organizations, like organizations, community foundation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me pause you there. So the research really falls into two different categories. So you have corporate research, which it's easy to look on their website, easy to read about them. I mean, Google's now your best friend, right? Yeah, you can Google anybody about anything. And so that's easy to do the research, harder to get a meeting though. And we'll talk about that kind of later on. But let's focus a little bit on researching individuals because that's somewhat more difficult. This is where you really need to become a sleuth on the internet. It's all out there. It is all out there. The other thing you can look to see is who is successful in your community, whether nonprofits are very successful in your community, and look at their sponsor list. So when you're talking about individuals, usually community foundations have more individual sponsorships than, let's see, a chamber of commerce, although I wouldn't rule out a chamber. But if you go to their websites, find out the individuals that are sponsoring the community foundations, do some homework, see if it's aligned with what your mission is and what you're trying to accomplish. That's an easy way to at least see if you might have a possibility of a connection. Steve, what else are you seeing?
Let's see, talk to local officials, grant station, banking, find out the foundation or grant giver's goals, definition of success, V2V network to see what other villages are doing for fundraising, word of mouth, grant making, personal relationships, boards of community businesses, mission statements, calling up or contacting somehow funding.
So I hear a lot of things that are back to identification. So, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But when I think of boards, when I think of going to public officials, it is a blend and those things can blend together. But once you've identified folks, you've got to do your homework. However it is, it might be talking to officials or talking to community foundations, but I just want to draw a distinction between those two because you want to be able to go in ready to talk about what your donor wants to talk about, not what you want to say. This is a donor-centric model, this fundraising cycle. It's all about what your donor wants to hear, whether they're a corporation or an individual. And you'll be able to fit that in. You'll fit in all the things you want to say if you're listening to how they're reacting. So let me move to the next one. I believe the chat's captured, and so people can read the full things on here, right, Steve?
Absolutely, yep.
Great. Okay, let's go to the next one. So the next one is about planning. Now, we all know planning is important. If you are a village with staff, then this is really the staff's role. I will put that aside. If you're not a village with staff, perhaps you have a group on your board that's focused on fundraising. This is where this lies. It's when I talk about planning, I'm talking about what kind of past performance have donors that have already given to you. Could you ask for a little bit more money than you have in the past? What tactics are you going to intentionally put in place? How can you diversify your portfolio of those giving to you? And how are you helping your volunteers prepare for the visit they're going to make? What is a packet going to look like? What do they need to take with them? So again, this is normally a staff role if there is staff, but if there's not, it's a focused committee work. Is anything showing up in the chat that might add to what I just articulated, Steve, or should I move to
No, nothing there on that.
Okay.
Our audience is very directed. When we tell them we want feedback, they give it to us.
Okay. All right, great. Well, this next one's going to be then, you're going to be reading fast.
Okay.
So let's talk about cultivation. So cultivation is critical. You can't just meet someone at a coffee and ask them for money in the same 5 minutes. It will not end well for you. Or you'll get a little teeny bit and never be able to ask again just because they don't want to hear from you. Cultivation is key. This is the moment where you get to bring people in closer to you, have them understand the wonderful work you're doing. Why does that work matter? Who else is involved and what's in it for them? So why doesn't everybody put into the chat some ways that they believe they might be able to cultivate these newly identified and researched donors?
All right. Recognition. Invite them to a program, speaking to local groups, invite them to your events, build relationships, put them on your mailing list, invite them to anything, ask them to give you advice, find someone who knows that potential donor and enlist their help. With their permission, put them on your email list, inform them what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Leads from the board of directors, advertising in newsletters, ask how they like to be contacted, find out what their needs are as a donor, invite them to speak, put them on a panel of experts, consider them part of your larger community, thank them in your print materials, give back to them, like their Facebook page.
So let's separate out stewardship and cultivation too. I heard you say thank them. We're going to talk about thanking in stewardship, but you're on the right path because you might thank them when you're in the room with them too, for even attending something that you're doing. So those are all great examples. I'll throw a few more in and I want to connect it back to the session that I had the opportunity to watch earlier. Again, it's connected the same way that memberships are. When you're cultivate for members as well as for dollars, because those things are so lined up. So in our pre-COVID world, when we had events, it's actually bringing somebody with you. If it's a ticketed event, maybe you offer them to come as your guest. If it's not someone that an individual is bringing along, maybe the village wants to take 3 or 4 individuals they've identified and invite them as their guests to come in and hear more. It's really having them participate. If you have had the chance to talk to individuals a little bit about what you do, you might ask them to go on your newsletter. If you have a newsletter, I know some do, would they be willing to receive your newsletter? I want to pause and repeat that. Would you be willing to receive our newsletter? Permission-based marketing is going to get you so much further than just putting them on the mailing list. I really encourage you never to just add someone because they will unsubscribe from you and then you've broken the relationship. But when you invite someone in, ask permission, and you add them, I will tell you, they'll read the newsletter. If they choose to unsubscribe, Don't take it personally. Just know it's because they didn't feel that connection. But it gets your foot into the door of their brain and introduces in the manner that you wish the great work that you're doing. So if you don't currently have a newsletter or some way you're communicating, whether it's just an email group, I encourage you to be doing that. Going back to partnerships, invite your partnerships in and ask them to bring some people with them, ask companies to bring people, part of their employees with them to anything that you're doing. All right, let's shift that to the COVID world. I heard in the session before, I believe it was Madeline, who so beautifully said that her board was hosting virtual coffees or chats and inviting people to talk about membership. You can do the same thing with fundraising. So a board member could host a living room chat over Zoom where you may speak about the incredible work and the impact of the village and ask them to just learn more. That's cultivating them closer and closer to you. Social media connections too. I'm hopeful that many of you have a social media page and you post regularly on it. That's another way. When you meet someone, ask if they would like your page. Once they do, they'll start to receive information. It's just really the social media way of doing a newsletter. Very, very, very powerful. I heard you all say also you're very interested in having multi-generations. If this is of interest to your village, then social media is a must. There are no two ways around it. It's not going away. In fact, it's exponentially getting larger. So please leverage that in a cultivation. Anything else before I move to the next slide, Steve, that you feel jumps out at you?
Let's see. Not ask them to bridge the village. Well, you can be a bridge between your village and an assisted living community if the community has a wait list. The go to events. I think this is good. Let's keep on going.
Okay, let's go on to the next one then. All right, the infamous ask. Here it is. It's my favorite one. The reason it's my favorite is because we've built up to it. So if someone asks me to represent their organization and go out and ask someone for money, they are going to help me as a volunteer by sharing with me the research, sharing with me how the person is currently engaged, sharing with me the planning that's been done behind it. So I'm not just walking in with my own personal knowledge and that's it. I actually have a background on this individual. And that's so key for my comfort. The other thing is I'm going to walk in and will have practiced with someone. If someone's asking me to do the ask, we literally have a practice session before so that the person's prepared for the potential questions that they may be asked. But really, as a volunteer, if you walk in with your heart, you've got it. You've got it because your heart and your story is what they want to hear. That's the human connection. And then listen, listen, listen. If the donor asks you a question, you don't know the answer, it's okay. Just say, I don't know, I'll get back to you. You are not expected to know every single thing. And that's the beauty of it. Your expectation is to make a personal connection to this human that you're in the room with. And that will take you so many places. Repeat back what you're hearing them say so that you're clear as they share with you what they're interested in. So what I'm hearing you say is this. Many of you know these techniques, these mirroring, clarifying techniques that help us make sure we're on the same page. But it also helps your donor know that you're with them. Ask them what they care about. Why did they take the meeting? What would they like to learn? This may be very different from the approach some of you have had in the past where you walk in and you say, no matter what, I'm going to say these 3 things, I'm going to get them out, and you start your story. I would suggest asking questions first. You can still have your 3 things you want to get across, but by asking them, they're immediately engaged. Watch the body language, whether it's on Zoom or in person. Are they leaning into you? Are they asking questions? Or do you see them sitting back and not really focused? you'll know, but watch their body language. That's always so important. What else do people have in the chat, or would you be willing to put in the chat? Maybe I haven't asked. Please throw some things in the chat you feel are important about soliciting.
And while we're waiting for some of those to come on board, Betsy, the, keeping all of this organized is essential. What board members, what team members have asked and who they've asked, and taking notes, I imagine.
Mm-hmm. It is. And I think every village is going to have to come up with what they either wish to do or can afford to do. There are beautiful software programs that keep this straight for you, but some are expensive, some are not. I don't know. I know the budgets probably run the gamut.
Yeah. Okay. So
Certainly
here's some
a simple
comments.
spreadsheet would work.
Explain how your services meet the needs of their parent, spouse, or relative. The point you made earlier, you're not asking for money for yourself, you're asking on behalf of others.
Mhm.
We provided a script and background information to our board before they made sponsor calls. It helped them feel confident and prepared. Read body language. If there are others that should talk to who might be interested, try to say yes to everything. You will never know where one contact will lead you. Make sure they have given in the past and acknowledge, very important there. Have a dollar amount that you want and don't leave without asking. Keep them talking. Ask if donor person has a family or connection to someone like your beneficiaries. It's better, find out if it's better to phone or email ask. Make sure you follow up with them, even if they say no at first.
Yeah.
Taryn has a question. What is a good strategy over long term for repeat funding from a foundation, or a strategy for how you will sustain your program after this grant?
Excellent. So let's stay tuned to the renewal part of this, because that is where
Okay.
you have the re-engagement, you keep people on board with this.
Okay.
Yeah, so I love that question. I'm so glad it was asked. Steve, let me go back to, as we're talking about solicitation, I believe one of the things that you read me was make sure that you ask and follow up. Those are things that are very, very important. I would also say when you call to make the either phone call or a Zoom call or in person at a park or whatever it is these days that people are willing to do, if someone will allow you a face-to-face, even in their backyard, that's always going to be the most successful. That's, the data suggests it. But in the world today, if you can get them to Zoom with a video, that's pretty close. But what's critical is that you tell them why you want to meet with them. This isn't some game to play. Donors don't play games. They appreciate people being straightforward, and they're ready for it, especially if they're a donor who is kind of very philanthropic in your entire community. Let them know why you're coming. The good news is when they can take the call or the meeting, whichever it ends up being, they'll have their checkbooks ready because they know you've been upfront with them about why you want to meet with them. Otherwise, you're wasting everyone's time. And I do believe in my heart, and my experience has been that donors do want to serve their community and they just don't know how. So when you prepare them for this meeting, they are going to be prepared with questions. And that's a really nice way to start a meeting. Steve, anything else that jumps to you, or can we move to stewardship?
I would say let's move and we can always come back.
That's great. Okay. So let's talk about stewardship. So stewardship, front and center, is how you steward the dollars you have been given. So this is after someone makes a gift to you. What do you do to appreciate them? Let's throw some things in the chat.
Okay.
So while things are getting thrown in and Steve's, starting to read, I'll give you one. So one is the board member can make calls. Some of the most successful organizations I have seen at the end of their fiscal year will get a list of their top donors, as much as they have the bandwidth to do. And everybody will take somewhere from 5 to 10 calls, and they'll literally pick up the phone, not email, pick up the phone and call just to say thank you. I cannot even begin to express how powerful that is. And I will tell you that an organization I'm working with right now just did this. Probably 80% of them got voicemails. They were somewhat discouraged, but I will share with you the flip side of that. An organization that I donated to called and got my voicemail, but they left me a beautiful message. And so what I shared immediately with others was, even though I wasn't on the call, maybe that person on the other end was discouraged, they didn't get me. I heard it. It had the same impact. I was grateful that they cared enough to pick up the phone and just say thank you. So many of you that were number 4 on the polls, could you pick up the phone? Are you willing to say thank you in person or in the park or on the phone or on a Zoom call, whatever you all decide? You cannot thank people enough. In fact, somebody once said, well, gosh, I got thanked twice. And I expected them to say, oh, I can't believe the records weren't straight. Instead, they said, it was so awesome. I got 2 thank yous. I've never heard anybody say, I got thanked too much. So what are you seeing in the chat, Steve?
Personal thank you letter versus email, recognition on newsletter at events, personal thank you. We put all recognition on web, social media, newsletter, the logo link, educate on how you take care of their money, demonstrate how efficient you are. We want our money to be spent well. Small thank you gifts, definitely coupled with a call, personal message. If you get their permission, publish their name in the newsletter, invite them to events to see the awesome village mission, introduce them, personal written thank you, continue to send them stories of success, send a personal letter from the president, send photos of the events they are funding, personally, handwritten note, always impactful.
Yeah, those are great. There was one that you read that I really want to go back to and emphasize. It is absolutely a brilliant idea to put something in a newsletter or highlight a donor, but ask their permission. And I heard you say that, and I just wanted to pull it out and emphasize it, because some donors are all about it, and others, it's absolutely the last thing they want. In fact, if you do it without their permission, you may lose a gift in the future. So please, please make sure you're in conversation. And even if someone says, no, I don't want to be recognized, you're on the phone with them and you can say, well, we certainly are going to honor your wishes, but we're so grateful for your support. That does not mean they shouldn't get a thank you call or a personal letter or many of those other things. It just means be very careful where you publish their names. So yeah, those are great.
Betsy,
Let's move to renewal.
Betsy, I'm going to interrupt for 1 second.
Yes, go ahead.
One of the challenging comments we got earlier was a question about quid pro quo. What about some of your donors and maybe their corporate sponsors that are looking for something back from you, perhaps more advertising or commercial versus donation? How do you deal with that?
So, yeah, that's a great question. I'm so glad, and it's definitely worth pausing for a moment. What I just went through as far as the suggestions I was giving you were mostly for individuals, but let's talk about corporations for a second. Corporations expect to be thanked. Many of them keep track of if you write that thank you note. And if you don't, you're not going to get the dollars again. Many of them have reporting that needs to be done. Please do it. They look and see if you do it. They are required to have that for their audit. When you talk about recognition, here's what I have found to be the most successful. Ask them. I mean, many times if you're having an event, you may have different categories or levels of giving, but in general, ask them what's important to them, because somebody may say, oh, please don't make me fill a table. I just don't have that type of organization. I've got 4 different people, but they may, like somebody like a Comcast or somebody that's your cable provider. They don't want a table, but they love to be the person at the podium or the person on your webinar that introduces someone. Ask them what's important to them. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, let's talk a little bit about renewal. So renewal is not asking for the next gift. Renewal is keeping people involved. How do you keep them involved? And that's why I love the question that was asked just a few minutes ago. How do you keep your foundations involved, grantors, individuals? Why don't you all throw into the chat things you've done successfully to keep people engaged? While that's happening, Steve, I'll give one that I have found very successful, and I hope this helps others. If you are doing anything new, a new program, or you have a strategic plan that you haven't had before, anything like that, for your top level donors, call and say you'd love to just share with them some exciting news. You're not going to ask them for money. Say that up front. This is not a solicitation call. I just want to share with you something we're really excited about. That helps them travel the journey of your mission with you. You want them as your partners. You want them side by side with you and to feel engaged, because you know what? They'll become your ambassadors. When they have given, whether corporate or individual, when they have given you dollars, they'll be in the community talking about you if you've given them the talking points, the new, the exciting, what's going on. That renews their energy. So think of renewal as renewing their energy in your organization. Steve, what are you seeing in the chat?
Let's see, continue asking what you can do for them. Invitation to an event with a host to guide and make welcome, providing updates. Keep them up to date on what you're doing with newsletter, phone calls, etc.
Keep them up to date. That nails it right there, and all the different methods that might entail. So let me move to what I hope will be a very helpful tool for you. So this is, I hope for you, a way that you can, this is the handout, and this is going to be, and if you can throw it in the chat, Steve, please do, because I hope you'll print this out. This is your tool to take with you as the trainer in this exercise for your board. You can do exactly what I did in person or on a Zoom with your board. The lines are there because at the end of this, you'll say to them, where do you see yourself? And people will actually write their names down. Then you've got subgroups, and your entire board is working on the fundraising cycle. So I'm going to stop there, and I want to see if it's possible. Steve, I'd love to have you run the poll again.
Okay, well, actually what I did, because I made a little error on the poll, and I hope this is okay. On the first poll, I had 2 questions that were the same. I just basically, I created a new question that said, did you learn something more about fundraising? Is that okay?
You can say anything you want, but what I want to know is, would they now be willing to be on this cycle? Do they see themselves? And if it's easier, people can just write it in the chat, or I'm happy to do it with questions. They can raise their hands, whatever you think. I'm going to stop sharing screen if that's all right.
Okay.
And glad to take questions.
And Betsy, we do have one question after we've gone through this poll.
Sure.
Oh, just go ahead and ask it.
This poll.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Yeah, just ask it.
We've got a question from Haley who's asking, how do you go about asking for funding for, or mostly for overhead? Does all funding have to go towards providing services and resources?
So that's a great question, because it's called overhead, it's called admin, it's all the things that aren't direct programs. It's what I call the beautiful dollars, the unrestricted funds. You want unrestricted funds, hands down. So unless they suggest that they want it towards something specific, I encourage you not to suggest. Talk about the outcomes that you're seeing. Talk about the level of engagement you're seeing with people in the villages. And right now, talk about the impact of the village as far as its mental health with those that are members. The story you all have is perfect for right now. And if somebody wants to give something to a specific program, don't try to talk them out of it. Just say that is wonderful, and absolutely have them do that and keep the journey going. If your program stops though, just remember those are restricted funds. You must go back to your donor and ask permission to use them for something else. So Steve, I'm thrilled to see that people's minds have been changed about fundraising.
Yeah, that's a hard topic to change people's minds on.
Yeah.
Betsy, we've got another question here that's, I think, a little bit more specific, but let me read it to you. This is from an organization, Carol. She says, we are not a nonprofit, and to receive the grant we were awarded, we had to receive it through another entity. which kinds of entities can be our fiscal sponsor? The local civic organization is 501c3, but was not the kind of C3 that could be our fiscal partner. What kinds of C3s can be our fiscal
So
partner?
Wendy, I'm going to repeat that. If you can lean a little bit closer to the mic, that will help me. What I heard you say was that this organization is not a C3. They've looked for partners, they found one, but they don't have a C3 branch. So Chambers of Commerce, for example, are C6. So you can't partner with them to be a fund pass-through, right?
Mhm.
So one of the things, you need to find a partner or become a C3. And if your community, I heard someone say their community doesn't allow it, go to your community foundation. They will help you if they can't do it themselves, they are there to help people do things just like this. So I would say community, I hope that organization has a local community foundation. If you don't, I think I heard you say, Wendy, they have a grant, but they can't get it in the door because they don't have this.
The C3 was their problem. Why don't we
Right.
move on?
Right. The other thing I would do is I would go to your government, because sometimes governments, although they don't have C3s as part of how they're designed, they may have identified a local organization that's functioning as their C3. Certainly in Arlington, we have one that does that right now based on our housing needs. So I would just ask around. Law firms might be able to suggest ways too.
Mhm.
What
There's
else?
a question here that asks, do you suggest levels of giving?
Pardon me?
Do you suggest levels of giving?
So the person may have to come on to ask that. So I'm going to take it two ways. I'm not sure if they mean, do you suggest levels of giving when you're having an event or when you're in the middle of the meeting? So I'll share both answers. If you are having an event, yes, suggest levels of giving. It helps people fit in philanthropically to what they want to do. If you're asking an individual and you've done your homework, yes, have in mind what you think the capacity is. But here's where it's tricky. A lot of the research, and this is very true in Arlington, does not adjust itself with net worth for housing prices. So if you're living in an area with very large housing prices, it throws off people's reports you might get. When you're with someone, also remember too, you're not the school and you're not the religion. So you've got to get the connection. My theory on this, and I'm going to say theory because I don't have the data that's backing up, is to start small, offer something that you feel is reasonable based on what you've seen them give to others.
Related to that, there's a question that asks, do you suggest publicizing levels of donations, for example, on a website?
Oh gosh, this question is asked so much. And the answer, which isn't as definitive as I know you want, is it depends. So I would look and see what your peers are doing, your other nonprofits. If your community does it, do it. If your community doesn't, don't. And that sounds like a sort of a cop-out answer, but I don't mean it that way. I just mean you're never going to get 100% agreement on that. Never. Schools do it, churches don't. I mean, it depends on what your community is used to. I think that the important part is to be clear to your donors, because there's many donors, especially at the top level, that want to be anonymous if you're going to publish levels. They're glad to give you the money, but they don't want their name out there associated with that top level because everybody else will ask them. Steve, did you put that poll back up?
Oh, yeah, but I screwed up again.
No, don't worry. I'd rather just answer another question. Wendy, what else do you see?
Well, luckily, there were a couple of people who clicked in to help the person with the C3 question with
Great.
a lot of good suggestions locally. So the chat is working. We do have a somewhat tangential question.
Okay.
Someone asked, for the villages that have no paid staff, minimal budgets, and no emphasis on fundraising other than dues, what do they perceive the benefits of this model to be? And I have to say, Don, I really don't understand for sure what you're trying to get to with that question.
Well, while you're waiting for Don to maybe give his angle, Wendy, what I was excited to hear is, an opportunity came to my brain. If you don't have staff, you can form, it's a great affinity group of people willing to have the discussion. I will promise you that your members know people you can ask. So I'll repeat again, when you're doing identification, there's nothing wrong with asking your members who they might know. Your members themselves might personally know them or know of them, but you have an entire group of people that are in your membership that I'm sure will be glad to help. And if the reason I say that is they were willing to become members and pay dues, so they are vested, and they are vested in the success of the organization. So that would be my first stop.
Okay, and we got Don raising his hand. So Don, if you had a question that you wanted to ask.
Yeah, my question would be, in a village, what percentage do you find of the costs of the village are covered by membership versus what percentage is the fundraising responsibility?
Gosh, Don, I'm going to turn that back to Barbara because she may have those statistics. I don't know all the villages and how they're broken out. I know there's a broad range. Barbara, do you have some data around that?
So I just caught the tail end of it because I've got somebody trying to get on. So
Yeah.
I was paying attention to that.
No,
Tell
that-
me the question again.
Yeah, the
Barbara,
question
let
is
me
what-
answer it for my village.
Okay.
Don, this is Wendy Zanker. I'm in Arlington, Virginia. When I look at my overall budget, we do have 2 part-time paid staff and a budget that's in the $140,000 range. About 60% of our dollars come from membership fees, 20% from individual donors, and 20% from grants.
Okay,
Does that answer that question?
that's one response. That's right. And I'm the fundraiser or the development person for our village, and I've been responsible for 60% of the funds, the budget, and 40% is from membership. And I'm just wondering if it shouldn't be more on a 50-50. It's easier actually to raise money than it is to get members sometimes.
Well, you know, what we've seen over the past couple of years is that grants, as we become more well-known in the community in terms of the services that we're offering, grants are becoming a little bit more of a percentage of our budget, and we rely less on membership or don't have to raise membership fees to keep maintaining the same level of support.
So Wendy, one thought is I just noticed in the chat, I think there's a great question everyone can benefit from the answers. And I don't have the answers, the room has the answers. The question is from Marianne, and it says, what are the key points to present to a donor prospect about the value of the village to the community? So I'm going to ask everybody to make sure that when they respond, they're responding to all panelists and attendees. And if I said to you, give me 3 points you feel are very important that are about the impact you make in your community, what are they? And throw them in the chat. And Marianne, you'll see what the whole country is doing right now.
That's a good answer. Yeah. It's the value, the value proposition that your village brings to your community.
So if everybody throws it, you can see if we connect with one, but your board should discuss what is the value you're bringing. And that's what you want your donors to learn. So Steve, what are you seeing there that is of interest, or Wendy?
Well, let's see. In Q&A, we've got, are there differences in strategy for going after legacy gifts from individual donors?
No, it's actually in the chat room. There's so much that's going in here, and it's from, lessening isolation to healthier individuals, healthier communities, staying connected, stay active, stay home, decreased isolation, research on changing aging, meeting specific gaps identified in the community, transportation, food security, which we didn't even touch on, social interaction, safety, security, connection, fun, engagement, awareness of aging issues, engaging and helping members.
So Barbara, what I
Yeah.
would suggest is everybody download the chat. After, when you throw it up at the end of October, everybody can download all these great ideas.
Absolutely.
Because I know we're close to the end, answer the legacy question very fast that Steve asked. So there's a lot of research out there on legacy and planned giving, and certainly the generation that is ready to do that is prime. But I have two really critical things to share. Number one, do not ask somebody for a legacy gift unless they've been a donor for quite some time. They won't be ready and you will lose that opportunity. And the second thing is, I certainly wouldn't be asking for a legacy gift right now. We need to get well beyond COVID, well beyond the economic recovery, way down the line. I just, right before the job I have now with True North, before that, I worked for a hospital. They practically stopped their planned giving because it's just inappropriate at this very moment. So that gives you lots of time to research how to do it when the time's right.
Good thoughts. Well, we're going to have to close now. Betsy, you're a doll. Thank you very much.
Barbara, anything?
Wow, lots of information.
I hope it was helpful.
Oh my
And,
goodness.
Carry on with you all's great work. And Wendy, I look forward to seeing you in our community.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, terrific. Well, we're going to go into our next presentation. It's on grant writing, and Carol Hegeman has been, she has done grant writing workshops for us for years. She is the co-author of Grant Writing for Aging Services and Programs. She is the vice president of a New York State village, which has already received 3 grants, 1 new and 2 that have to be renewed. And she is known as a vibrant and engaging national speaker. So Carol, without further ado, we're going to have you come on.
All right, Carol, I got you over there. There we go. Whoops. Let me, oh, that's Carol's screen. Okay. Carol, unmute yourself there. Say something so we can make sure you're
saying something. Hello, everybody, but I don't see you. I don't know if you see me or not.
you're sharing your screen right now. So were you going to be
I'm
using
not.
the PowerPoint?
Do you want me to stop it, Steve?
Oh, is that your screen, Barb?
It might have
There we
been.
go. Okay.
Okay, so share screen and
Select what you want to share.
Are we going to share your PowerPoint, Carol?
I hope so.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Then don't share your screen. Let us do it.
All right, fine. That'll
I'm
be
scrambling. Travis, if you can beat me to it, be my guest. But I have got grant writing in villages.
That's it.
Okay, let me, I can do this real quick. I got it, Travis. And it's just loading up and there we go. Okay, that's your PowerPoint, correct?
yes, excellent. Oops.
Okay, hold on.
Hang on,
It's
it's loading.
Okay.
the mice.
All right.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. I'm ready to go, huh?
Yeah,
you're-
so you're gonna just need to sort of prompt me when to move the slide.
Okay, go right ahead. Go to the next slide. You heard a little bit about me, everybody. I'm the author of the book Grant Writing for Aging Services and Programs. I'll give you information at the end of the session. I'm also a vice president of a new village, and I've been an award-winning grant writer for over 30 years. And what's really been incredibly valuable for me, aside from being a national trainer and writing the book, is that I reviewed grants at the state and federal level. And boy, was it interesting to sit on the other side of the fence and see what other people are saying. Next slide. Okay, just to be clear, some of you may have heard me on a 20-minute mentor seminar. There is a little bit of repetition. Sorry about that, but this is a whole I'm stopping at 45 minutes to do Q&A, so there's double the time. So I have more information and a whole bunch of new tips. The most important thing for you is you have to understand, because of time, this is not a grant writing workshop per se. You don't do that in 45 minutes. You know, when I do that, I do it for 6 hours. The Grantsmanship Center does it for 2 days. So what's reasonable here is to me to present ideas for you for writing an effective grant, particularly from the lens of writing a grant from villages. I said for that reason, I was looking for attendees to have some experience in writing grants. But if you're a newbie, you're absolutely welcome. I think there's a lot of stuff here you can use. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, you can keep the slide. But what I wanted to say is that there's a lot of information here. And normally I would break it up with a lot of interaction. But because I want to cover it and get to Q&A, I'm going to just keep right on talking. Okay, so that's the way it's going to go. The other way it functions is that in most cases, not the first tip, but in most tips, I tell you what the tip is. I tell you what the rationale is, and then I come back and tell you how you can do it. So having said that, everybody, I love my graphic on this. Know the difference between grant writing and fundraising, and how nice it was to put me on right after the fundraising workshop. The biggest mistake people think is money is tight. Let's go get ourselves a grant. Please disabuse yourself of that. It's really, there's something on my machine now. Okay. It's really very hard to get a grant that makes a lot of money for you the way fundraising does. You can't go grant fishing to feed your budget. Next slide, please. It took me a very long time to do this graph, but I think it's really useful. Now, you notice in top, I say in most cases, there are always exceptions, so I am talking generally. But in most cases of fundraising, the money is usually for the agency as a whole. It's what I heard the other speaker call unrestricted funds. You know, there's an exception. If your roof is falling apart and you have a fundraising strategy to raise the roof, you have to use the money that way. But most of the time, it's just for you to operate. Now, in grant writing, money is usually targeted for a specific project. Now, of course, there is something called an operating grant, but they're about as common as hen's teeth. So you don't often get them, so I'm not going to focus on that. Bless you if you get them, it's great. But this is usually true. For fundraising, money is fungible. You can, let's go back to the roof example. When you say you're going to build a roof and you think you're going to paint it blue, nobody's going to really get angry at you unless they said, I'm only funding a blue roof. But in grant writing, money must be spent according to the grant budget. That means one of the most important things in grant writing is getting your budget right. And I find that most novice grant writers spend 95% of their time on grant writing and then go over to the grant budget. That is a good way to get in deep doo. So you really want to pay attention to your grants. Strings may be attached in grant fundraising. In grant writing, there are always strings attached. You have reports to write. Sometimes they're so onerous. If it's a $3,000 grant, they want you to write quarterly reports. It's not worth your money, folks. So you have to see what strings are attached. Fundraising, unless you've hired the worst fundraiser in the world, you will probably get revenue from your fundraising. Grant writing, from the point of view of the most grant funders, is intended to be almost budget neutral, as funds are dedicated to new projects or expansion of an existing project. Again, if you get operating grants, that doesn't apply, but this is usually the case. Now, here's the scary part. Grants are a contractual obligation. If you've not planned well, meeting these obligations can cost you money. What? How? What? Here's how. If you don't come fairly close to meeting your goals, and I don't mean if you said you were going to serve 120 people and you ended up serving 108, you know, that's close enough, that's reasonable. But if you really failed miserably, you might want to consider going back and putting in the money to make yourself successful. Why? Because you have a reputation, particularly when you do small grants in a community. You say you're going to do something and you run out of money doing it, it doesn't look good for you in the future. And also, I was lucky enough to attend years ago a Grant Writers and Aging conference. And you know what happens? It's kind of strange. They sit around at lunch, and I was the only grantee there. And you know what they talked about? Who they funded and how well they did and how well they followed up on their grant. So you really want to try to meet your grant obligation. And to do that, it may mean putting your money in. So next slide.
Yep.
Yeah. So having said that, I wouldn't blame you, particularly if you're a novice, if you say, that's it, I'm not doing any grant writing. I'm going to go back and just do fundraising. But my point in scaring you was to say grant writing makes a tremendous amount of sense to supplement fundraising. It is a great way to get money in from a different source from people who want to fund you. The other thing grant writing does is because you basically do a business plan, whether you know it or not, when you finish your proposal, you are getting a very organized way of doing your grant. Next slide, please. Okay, tip 2, I alluded to this a little earlier. I suggest, especially for those of you who are new, focus on your local funders. Next slide. Why? Your village is locally known and of interest to a wide variety of people, banks, and community foundations. No, I don't know what that word his is doing there. Sorry about that. Therefore, they're vested in you, which is a great way to start instead of introducing yourself to somebody you don't know. The second one is also important. Unlike many grants, which expect you to write a sustainability plan into it, and then they ask, what do you do when this money runs away? Many local foundations will just be willing to continue to fund you after the grant is completed. And third, the reason, in a local community grant, if you use your networks, your success rate is likely to be good. Next slide, please. How do you do that? Find your local grants. This is easy. Check their webpage or asking a branch manager what their grant policy is. I know I'll talk about my local community. One bank wants just a letter. They don't tell you 1 page, 5 pages, 3 pages. They say, tell you how much money you want, tell us what you want it for, keep it to 1.5 pages, you put in your 501c3, you're done. Others want a formal application, but it's usually 3 to 5 pages compared to the complicated grants you have to write for the states and the feds. However, where do you find them? Here's a site. This is the Grantsmanship Center.com funding sources. I'm going to suggest that those of you who have your phone handy, instead of waiting to get a copy of all these slides, take a photo shot of that, and then you don't have to scribble down all those long addresses. But if you do lose it, remember that this stands TGC stands for the Grantsmanship Center. And you can scroll through their wonderful pages and find out. The other way to find about people who might fund you, and you might think this is a little devious, But be sure you read all the news articles about agencies like yours and their annual reports. You know why? In the annual reports, you usually have to say who funded you. And if they funded an organization that's similar to yours, it might be a very good place for you to go to get that idea. Okay, next slide, please. Wait a minute, did we do tip 2?
Oh.
Go back one. All right. We are out of order here. All right. Go to the next one. That should say tip 3. And tip 3 was do not start
Oh,
writing.
wow. Yeah, we're missing tip 3. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Don't start working. Okay, this is going to be confusing, folks. I'm sorry. Tip 3 is don't start writing your grant right away. Go back, Steve, one, please. You're going, okay, go one more. Go one more. We're going backwards.
Yeah, I am. You want me to go forward?
Yes. Stop. And we'll go back one.
That's
Here we-
back.
Yeah. Tip 2 is don't start writing right away, folks. Do not sit down and start writing. Don't open up your computer, open up the request for proposal and answer the questions and go to the end. Why? Because no one person is smart enough to do that well. So you're going to use a planning abstract to get ideas and thoughts and challenges before you start to write. And you're going to share this with other people when it's what I call in the silly putty stage. You may, what you write here, if you've done your job well after the planning abstract, will have to be changed. And that is indeed the point of it. A planning abstract is a 1 to 3 paragraph statement of what you think the grant will be about that is easily shared with others. Let me tell you something about that. Way back in the day when I was even young and more bushy-tailed and very excited than I am now, I would have a great idea for my grant. He would be leaving his office. I would run after him, telling him my grant. And he basically, I was like a young puppy, and he basically said, go away. It's not an effective way to just chat about a grant. It's much more effective to email something and say, dear colleague, dear friend, take a look at this. Tell me what you think. There's another reason for doing it. You know, you're building in loyalty, you're building in investment. When people are asked to comment on something, they think about it and they feel vested in you and they're going to want to see the grant be an effective one. If you send them a fait accompli, it's her idea. All right, well, hope she gets it and you're done. Next slide, please.
Yep.
Here's a sample grant abstract. Now, Pleasant City Village, a 501c3, seeks funds to help seniors in Pleasant City age in place in their own homes. Okay, that's a statement of who you are. You're not writing a grant, it's just that one little sentence so people get who you are. It seeks funds to establish a free nurse consulting service for members. That's what you're thinking of doing. Now comes the part where people really begin to comment. This nurse consulting service will provide wellness checks for members 2 times a month. There's a question mark on that because you're asking for input during meetings for attendees and provide wellness education programs 2 times a month, question mark. Where? What barriers and challenges do you see if we pursue this grant? Now I'm gonna talk through the next slide a little bit here. I'm gonna ask a question and I'm gonna answer it because I don't want to spend the time of doing chat to answer it. Why do you think there are the blanks in there? And the answer is because there are blanks, people feel invited to give their comments and opinions. If we're done completely, they just think you want to sign off. They're not vested in it. You're not really asking for their input. Now, my next question I would ask if you were, in front of me and could talk, what barriers and challenges do you see if you pursue the grant? I would suggest this is the most important thing you would want to put into your draft abstract. Let me take that example. If you have somebody who knows healthcare, and you might not have that necessarily being a village, they might say to you, wait a minute, do you really think this is a great idea to hire your own nurse? There might be liability issues for her and for you. I would suggest strongly that you meet with your local Department of Health, your local VNA, your Visiting Nurse Associations, a CCRC, anyone else who has nurses and in a collaboration would share it. So as the result from doing this grant abstract, you have keep yourself out of trouble. Next slide, please. Okay, I didn't ask this question. Who should receive the draft abstract? Hint, don't limit yourself to your village board. I've already mentioned that the people who would be working on it, we talked about healthcare entities, but also some of your members. What do they think about this idea? Would they come to wellness sessions twice a week? Is that ridiculous? They don't feel sick? Find out from them. Who are the other stakeholders? Hospitals, then I mentioned them. But you want other people and other viewpoints. I talked about why there were blanks and questions in it. And of course, I talked about the element, what are the barriers in the project that you see? Okay, next slide. Pay attention to what reviewers want, not just what you want. This slide came to me after the second or third time I started doing grant reviews. Next slide. Your writing goal is not only to tell your compelling needs from the perspective of your village. Of course your needs are compelling, and of course you want to tell them. But the reality is everyone else who's writing a grant to this funder often has equally compelling needs. So you have to be strategic. Your other goals are to make the reviewer think your proposal is exactly what they want to fund. And this is something like what the woman on fundraising said too, but it's true for grants as well. And the other goal is make it easy for reviewers to find the elements they need to see to evaluate your proposal. Next slide. Next slide, please. This is also important. Some RFP for the newbies, that's a request for proposal that's put out by foundations and banks sometimes. And they sometimes give you criteria and scoring points that reviewers use when they're reading the proposal. Be sure you read them and you cover them using the same words as in the criteria. I'd like to give you an example of that. A while back when I was still working at my 30-year job in doing grant writing and research in elder care, I wrote a proposal to the Corporation on National Community Service. And the primary goal of this grant initiative was to harness the energy of baby boomers in service. So shamelessly, but smartly, I wrote, the goal of this proposal is to harness the skills of baby boomers in service by engaging them in service to other seniors. And right away, people funding it said, wow, this grant is on target. Next slide. Okay, tip 5 is my shortest little tip. It's very easy. Let's take a look at it. I think anyone who's written a grant before or knows what a timeline is. It generally looks like this: a time frame, months, task, person assigned. I'm going to suggest, because remember when I said early that your budget has to be right, it's your one chance of having a grant you're going to do well, that you add a temporary column for costs. And you be sure to take that out before you submit your grant. That's just for you. Look at month 3, promoting health series to members and prospective members. So the health educator, the executive director, or board member. And your costs would be for printed invitations, travels to speakers, etc., etc. You save this. So when you're ready to write the budget, you're reminded of all of your costs. Again, don't forget to get rid of it before you send out the grant. Next slide, please. Tip 6, use modules. Now, what's a module? This is the best we could come and do in graphic design. A module is a piece of a grant that is generally the same from grant proposal to grant proposal to grant proposal. There is no reason you shouldn't be writing them ahead. And now that we have people at home because of COVID with lots of skills, this is a great time to start. Next slide, please. Use your staff and volunteers to research and have ready all of this. And let me just say, this is a great way to use some of your members who are pretty much homebound but have great skills. Let them get on the net and do the needs assessment for your community. And that would include things like poverty levels, ethnicity, special characteristics of the community. They can do that for you, even though you don't have a grant in mind. They can do that in a 1-paragraph version. They can do it in a 2-paragraph version. They can do it in a 3-page version. Agent capability statement. Why are you so good? Who's on your staff? Who's on your board? What have you accomplished? What are some endorsements from your members? What's basically your case for being an effective village? I heard the term social repair. That would go in there beautifully. Your mission statement, describe the area to be served, describe personnel. In any case, the point is you can have this done ahead of time. Now, there is a very big caveat to this. Each grant is different, and as a grant writer, I can always tell when somebody plugged part of another grant into a different proposal because they didn't modify it. You have to change it for each grant you do. Okay, next slide. I don't know how many grants I've written. I want to say 70 or 80. It's very hard not to end up with a discrepancy in your grant at some point. But here are some ways you can get ahead of that. Go right ahead. Next slide, please, Lee. It's natural to change items as you write and calculate your budget. For example, you start and you're thinking, let's go back to the example I used when we were talking about the draft act, about doing some kind of wellness programs and wellness checks. Yeah, so say you have a grant, it's $15,000 is the most you can ask for, and you think You're going to serve all your members once a month. And you start doing your budget and you realize that if you do that, this grant is going to cost us $20,000, which we don't have, and I don't want to get into matching funds. So you have to lower your numbers. So that's another reason you're likely to make mistakes. It's also natural to forget to change them. You might change them in your budget, but you might forget to change them throughout your text in the budget. And some discrepancies might make the reviewer question your capabilities or even your honesty. Your honesty? What do I mean by that? If you keep the higher budget items in your budget, you budget for 150, but in your narrative, you've only said you're going to do 100, a viewer might be suspicious and think you're just hoping, no, they won't notice and grant you that higher amount of money. So, or this also isn't good, but it's less bad. They just might think you're not very careful. And do they really want to give grant money to somebody who wasn't very careful? No. All right, next slide. Here's how you begin. Here's how you begin to do that. Let's take the example I gave. If you started with 150, then decided on 100, search for the number 150 throughout your document. You notice I said just use search and find. Do not use find and replace. That got me into trouble once. Because if you do find and replace automatically, every time you have 150, it's going to be changed to 100. So if your address is 150 Main Street, you're telling them that your address is 100 Main Street. So you have to be careful and judicious. Use find and take a look. Now, as often happens when you write a grant, you get better and better ideas as you go along, even after you've got all those great ideas from the draft abstract. So let's say you first called your project adding volunteers to Happy Valley Village. But as you went along, you started making it an intergenerational program. So you changed the name to All Ages at Happy Valley Village. You're going to search for the first name throughout the document. And this time you will use search and replace and change it to all names at Happy Village. Change all components, your budget narrative and attachments, not only a narrative, but also your all-important cover letter, which you might have had written and then you hadn't realized you changed the name there too. Okay, next slide. Tip 8, address COVID issues. Now, I wish I had a crystal ball and could give you really wonderful suggestion here. I can't. We're all a work in progress here. So I'm just going to share some information with you on this tip. Next slide. Do cover how your village is addressing social isolation and ensuring food delivery if you do that. Any funder will want to see what you were doing. If you're doing Zoom to address it, if you're doing some of the great ideas we heard early this morning about telephone programs and all kind of things. And if your volunteers go out, even if they don't transport residents, do they do food pick up in the store and deliver that? Cover that. And then say that your new grant wants to, whatever you want to do, increase that or add something more, but you need more funds to increase it. Okay, what can you do? You can present, as we're going into Zoom and live options for programming. I think the challenge we all have with this is that we don't know what it's going to be. If we write our grant only for Zoom, and it takes 3 to 6 months to get a grant, 6 months later or in the year you run the grant, we may be ready to use live options. So I think you almost have a 2-part budget. One, if we stay in COVID conditions, and two, if we don't stay in COVID conditions. It's almost like writing 2 grants. Now, you can present 2 options, and but how do you budget? You ask. I'm not sure, honestly, but here's my best guess. Budget for your live options and say that you're going to use additional the money that you don't use if you're stuck with Zoom to increase your additional Zoom programs or to increase your existing programs or whatever else you want to do. This is a tough one, but I have found from talking to a number of foundations and what I've been reading on grant writers' pages, they're going to be very forgiving in this area. I know the foundations that funded me and our village, they wrote back and say, you know, if you need to change your goals, go right ahead. So you might want to even say, may we, should situations change, we would like to rework our budget. Okay, next slide. So this is the semi-end, because I have something else before we go on to questions and answers. I know from doing that little 20-minute mentoring workshop, there were a lot of questions about the book I co-authored. I want you to know it's on sale at Amazon for $25 plus shipping and handling. But my co-author and I love the Village Movement, so we're offering it for you for $15, including regular postage and handling. Now, for the next slide, I suggest you take out your iPhone and take a screenshot. Next slide. Here is the order form. If you're not also, if you should be getting this from the Village Movement. If not, I can send it to you. But if you want it right away, a screenshot will give you your information here. The only tricky part of this is that because we're based in New York State, we have to charge sales tax. So if you're from New York State, include your tax exempt number. If you can't do that, no, go back, please. If you can't do that, oh, I'm sorry, that should be $15. Whoops.
Here, I can edit it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. All right, and there's your information. I hope you've got a screenshot of that. Okay. Next slide. Oh, okay, now what's in the book? Again, take a screenshot. I would rather, let's give them a minute to check, to get that screenshot. You'll also
Hey,
get,
Carol, we'll put it in our forms so that people
okay, let's
can
not
have
spend
that.
time.
Yeah, that's,
Thank you, Barbara. Let's not
Yeah.
spend time on this. Let's go on to Q&A. I imagine there are a lot, and I'm good. I have almost a little more than 20 minutes to take Q&A. So let's go.
okay.
Okay, so, yeah, oh, sorry.
No, that's okay.
There
Good.
should be
So we have a couple in the question answer from Jerry. He says, are you more likely to get a grant for innovative practices or best practices?
That really depends. It's a great question, and it really depends on the funder. If you're going for governmental grants, very often they want to see proven best practices. And you'd have to, I'm thinking of the federal grants I did. They all wanted a whole section on why you've called what they would call the intervention, and is there proof it's going to succeed? However, for the smaller community grants, they would love to see innovation. And I don't even want to make it that tight an answer. You have to look at what the funder says. There's usually information. They say, show me documentation that this grant will work. You know, you have to have something that has that famous term in research and now in grant writing called the evidence base. So you have to look. If you see the word, show us the evidence base, they're not looking for innovation. You may be able to say, we have an evidence base for something very like this, but it's never been done in villages. So there was something a little innovative about that. You know,
So it's funny, and
what a funder will do is really tough.
in the chat, two people said, actually, one said, I was never told to say best, always say promising. And then another one, Michael says best implies proven, which to your point, Carol.
Well, let me address that. I'm talking, most of the grants that want best practices are now you're not talking about what you have. They're asking you, what are the best practices in the field? And the more common phrase for that now, and I urge you to use it, is called the evidence base. So if you're asked to do a grant of that kind, show me that this grant is likely to work. And I see somebody just wrote the same thing, saying evidence base is even better. Thank you. That's Chad. That's exactly what I'm saying right now. Evidence base is what you want to use for grants that want to see best practices. And you have to go through the professional literature. One of the slides I left out for reasons of time is another terrific idea is to work with a college to get a grad student to do your research on your idea, and they can do their term paper on it. So that's important. Other grants do indeed want innovation, and these are your smaller foundations in general. They want to try something new. So it really does depend.
Terrific. I have another question in the Q&A. What is the best way to ask the funder to reallocate budget items once the grant has been awarded?
Well, first of all, as I said, you'd like to try doing that, but sometimes it's totally impossible. You write a letter showing your budget, you show the change you want to make, and you use the term a budget neutral change. I wouldn't suggest you try saying, I want more money. You are very likely not to get that. But let's say you under budgeted for costs for running an activity, but you're running a little lower in marketing. Ask if you can move money from the marketing line to the activities line or vice versa. But the phrase funders are most likely to respond positively to is this is a budget neutral change. I'm trying to make a change within the total budget, not asking for more money.
Okay, awesome. Judy asks, is it better to aim high for performance outcomes or aim for what's actually doable? Better to overreach and underperform, or question mark, sometimes it seems like we need to sound like we can do more than we can.
I love this question. And in my full hour grant workshop, I spent about 20 minutes on it. So let me give you
The condensed version.
the short answer. One, your goals and objectives form your evaluation. So if you overreach, you're going to end up being unsuccessful when you do your evaluation. On the other hand, you don't want to underball it. You say, we're going to help 10 members do something, that's, not ambitious enough. So, and there really is a case for being right on the mark, but do not over exaggerate what you think you can do, because you will be judged by how well you do that. And it's going to put you in a bad light. There's another problem too, in overstating. You have an ethical responsibility to grant makers, to people who fund you. You don't want to waste their money. And I have a whole thing in my big workshop on grant ethics. And this is the kind where you have to really be honest and find for that right sweet spot. It's a great question.
Rob said, I don't know if it's a question or just a comment. Keep an eye on possible new administration, which may have some pet approaches, e.g. Obama big on behavioral economics. Google nudge. I don't know what that means.
I don't know how to
I
comment.
don't know.
I haven't
Rob,
seen-
did you want to come on and pose a question to ask Carol?
Yeah, if Rob or anybody would like to ask a question verbally, you can just raise your hand and, okay, let's see here. And, okay, why am I not getting? Bear with
No.
me.
Okay. Wendy points out, just while Steve is looking for that, as a small nonprofit, I think it's important to be doable and success for the next round of funding.
I didn't understand what the question was. I'm sorry.
Wendy, do you want to ask? You on?
Yeah, sure. No, it wasn't a new question. I was just agreeing with you that I think it's important to be, to write grants around things that we think we can accomplish so that you can have good success and likely be seen a next round of funding from that local community funder. The grants we're going for are not one-time grants. We're hoping that we're building a relationship that will lead to continuous funding over several years. So I think it's important, as you said, to find that doable performance measure as opposed to the overpromised performance measure.
Rob is on now.
Yeah, just Nudge is a book about how you can get big changes from small inputs. The Obama administration is very big on sort of behavioral economics and things like you get more people to sign up for a 501c, for a retirement plan, savings plan.
401k, yeah.
Yeah, 401k, if it's a negative checkoff. In other words, you don't deluge them with changes. You say, if you don't pick one, we will put you into such and such a program. And there's been just tremendous amount of work done. Nobel Prize for one of the guys who cataloged it. And the book he wrote was called Thinking Fast and Slow. There's also a very good PBS series this season called Hacking Your Brain, about new ways to get changes to take advantage of the fact that social proof, which Donald Trump uses extensively, and so on. So I think this new administration may be looking for some innovative practices. If we have a new administration, if we don't,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, good point. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, the other thing I'd add is when you're looking at the RFPs, if it's a government agency, make sure that, I helped start a nonprofit that failed because a lot of our clients were not citizens and the federal money would not trickle down to them. So, thanks.
Thank you. Judy also asked, Judy, I'd love to hear the answer to this one. Are there any large funders that you know are especially interested in villages?
I wish I did. I would have been writing to them. However, I think that's narrowing too much. There's so much I couldn't say in a session of this size, but I think the last village meeting we had, our last live one in Chicago, combating social isolation. If it was sent once, it was sent 1,000 times. And loneliness is an illness, is a cause of morbidity. So I think instead of looking for big foundations that focus specifically on villages, look for ones that are focusing on preventing social isolation, in reducing comorbidities from loneliness. There are the big national foundations Pew Retirement Research. Now that's almost only in Chicago. But if you go to Grant Center online or the Foundation Center, you will see lots of big ones that run in that category. I do not know of one that is focused particularly on villages. As I said, I wish I did.
I have a great question. I'm mindful of the time. Hold on. This is great. It's from Barry. He says, we are based in Calgary, Canada, and about to join B2V. We are well funded by federal government grants for the next 3 years. Will this put off potential future funders? How and when should we start to seek for additional funding for programs that are important at the level that I'm writing grants? It's a good question.
Thank you. That's a great question. How lucky you are to have federal funding. Yes, this is a perfect case where you would look for grants and you can say that we have matching funds to support our basic needs to run our village. I cannot think of a funder in the world who wouldn't love to see that. And then you can say, however, we don't have funds to do some of the innovations we want to do with our village. So you could have both and use the previous fact that you have government funding as an asset. Because then the new funder will be excited about funding your new program and your new ideas or your expansion, something you couldn't do with government funding. And they won't be worried about, are you going to come back to them for operating funds year after year? So I think, yes, go for it.
So Chad asked, in Massachusetts, we now have health insurance for the poor funding housing. How you see the connection? How do you see the connections? It's health, homeless, use for emergency, more health care for anybody else. Any suggestions, Carol? I know, Chad, do you want to get on?
I'm having trouble understanding.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what she's asking.
Yeah, he raised his hand, but Rob has his hand raised.
Okay, Rob, go ahead.
Rob.
Me again, sorry. About your point about loneliness being a big deal, Obama's former Surgeon General, Vivek Murtha, M-U-R-T-H-A, has written a book called Together, and there's a longer subtitle on it. But, and I've downloaded it. I haven't read the whole thing, but I was skimming, and there's a big section on villages in there, and might give you some authoritative sources for your statements on the need for villages.
Yeah, these are great references, Rob, and I really appreciate them. I wasn't thinking of including them in this workshop, so I'm glad you added them.
This is great. Any other questions? I have one in the Q&A. How can we get copies of the slides for all these presentations? The answer is everything will be shared with everyone. All of our sessions are recorded. If you see at the top left corner, all the sessions have been recorded. The chat is downloaded, which is great resource information. And then the slides will be made available to everyone at the conclusion of the conference. This has been great, Carol. I know we have like 3 or 5 minutes. Any other questions, comments? Carol, I'll ask you to actually send me those forms and I will put them in the form, and so people can have access to them and just download it in a Word document. That'd be great. And these 2 sessions back to back have been great because we all look at the sustainability factor of our villages. And so not only the ask, as Betsy pointed out, and how to do the ask and get your board and committed to some type of resource with the funding, but then the grant writing is a huge component. And I know at the national level, we have put out grants and you have to be very specific. A lot of people were very disappointed and they didn't get the CCC money, which, I can't begin to tell you how many villages apply to it. So this has been very helpful, I think, especially for me. You know, a lot of villages are looking for funding for operations and how to get around, you know, some of the guidelines and get people to, you know, write grants for the operations component, you know, other villages, not just for programs. So I appreciate any other questions, comments, Carol?
No, I want to thank the questions. These, you know, I was just telling my husband that I think I've done probably 100 presentations over my life, not all on grant writing, but this was actually the best set of questions I've ever heard. I thank you, Rob, you know, for some of you, you know, those references. I love them. I look forward to them. The questions were great. And it was, I think you can, can I answer this one that just appeared?
Yeah.
No. The question was, can you include a grant writer's fee in when you apply for a grant? No. And in other, there's no discussing of that. That's not done. And other thing that's considered unethical by grant writing associations is that you can't pay a grant writer on contingency. You know, I'll pay you if you write the grant for us and we get it. A lot of professional grant writers refuse to do that because the success of writing the grant is often out of their control. Not the success of the quality of the grant, the success of the odds of getting funded. I want to tell you one quick story on that. We were supported. I had won 2 awards, not I, my agency, for grants that I wrote, and managers won 2 awards from a federal corporation. I applied for the 3rd time to the corporation. One reviewer said, this applicant has no idea what she's talking about. So, you know, odd kind of things can happen. And that's one reason grant writers don't like to work on contingency. Maybe you'll find somebody who will.
Well, thank you very much. I think we're going to end the session. We have a 2-minute lull that we're going to let people run out and get a quick bite to eat, like 2 minutes, and get a drink of water. Carol, thank you so much for all your time and
My
energy.
pleasure.
And we'll see you back in about 3 minutes. Next up is AARP, the new HomeFit.